out when I was in Bethel, mind you, and I was working on the Proclaimers book and the history of the organization. I found out that that the actual news on Jehovah's Witnesses was never carried out anywhere except around the Yankee Stadium building or the stadium. And that was an agreement made between the Watchtower officials and the newspapers. They had a special, you came out of the stadium and there were newsboys everywhere. And they were telling you, yelling at you to read about the convention. It was so thrilling because everybody was buying them so they could send them home or take the paper with them. Look at the coverage we got. Well, there wasn't any coverage. These were special newspapers made up just to sell to Jehovah's Witnesses. And it was an agreement between the New York News, the New York Mirror, and they made tremendous money on that. When I was looking at the archives at headquarters for my job, and I saw all of that, I was very shocked. So it was dishonest, actually dishonest.
Hello, everybody. We have a special guest today. Her name is Barbara Anderson, and she is going to tell her story of how she became one of Jehovah's Witnesses and then what led you to leaving the organization. So if you want to go ahead and tell us your story.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Now, I do have a lot of things to talk about because my story is quite long. I was a Catholic girl, raised in the church, but my parents were nominal Catholics, which means they really didn't practice it heavily like so many do. We went to church basically once a year on Easter Sunday. My father had been an altar boy. He had seen many things, corruption in the church. So he wasn't really interested in religion. And my mother, she came from Poland, and as a little girl, she heard her father, who was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, for reading the Bible, believe it or not. Yeah. So she'd hear the priest and my father arguing. Her bedroom was right near the room that had the big fireplace in it, and they would sit and drink schnapps, which is whiskey, in the evening and argue religion. So that's a long time ago. She was sent here to the US when she was 15. And so this is before that. She died, she was 91 when she died in 2006. And my father died in 2003. He was 91 then too. They had a long, interesting lives. So consequently, I had an interesting life because I took after them. They were very brave, and they were very conscientious. Let's put it that way. I'm not so much brave as I am conscientious. So I was reading the Bible, and I get started with it. I wasn't going to church much. If anybody went, I would go by myself. And so I was reading it, couldn't make it out. I was starting Genesis. I thought it was a regular book-like thing. So I'd start Genesis, and I kept reading the same thing. Who begat, how the kids. And then I started again, and I was just a kid, When I was 7 years old, I read Grapes of Wrath, which at the time was the worst book you could read. I was 7 when I read it, and that's how I found out babies were born, because it was in the book. So I was a nosy little character. And so I had an interesting childhood, and I was, I think I was about 7 or 8 when I would go over to the church after school once a week because even though we weren't practicing Catholic, my mom and mostly my mom wanted me to be confirmed in the Catholic Church. So first you have to have communion, first communion. So by 7, I had to go to class. after school, I'd walk over to the church. So one day, a little girl in same class as me, she was going to be have her first communion too. So she and I walked together to the church. It wasn't far from school. And a man tried to get us in the car, and he exposed himself. And so we ran as fast as our little feet could carry us to church. And we told the nun that was uh, she was teaching the class, and so the next day our parents were there because the police. She called the police. Catholic nun called the police, and so we were two little kids were standing there in front of a lineup trying to identify the man. So that was my first experience with child abuse. But my mother was good about all of that. She really instructed me very well on issues to moral issues. So the second time it happened, I was at my girlfriend's house, and we were sitting in her room upstairs on the window, where the window was a place to sit right in front of it. It was a big window. And her father came to the room and he told her to go downstairs. Her mother wanted her. And then he came, and he was a Wall Street businessman. And he had a beautiful suit on and everything like that. And so he sat down next to me, and I was about 12, I think. And he was explaining to me, talked to me as if I was a grown woman. So I was very flattered. And I had, back at that time, the girls wore skirts. And so as he was talking and I was listening, his hand was going up my leg. And so I stood right up. I never said a word. I just gathered my books and walked out of the room. Went down the stairs, went home, didn't tell a soul. I never spoke to the girl again. She never knew. I was cruel. That was it. As her father, what would you do? Tell her about her father, what he did. So then when I was a year later, two of my girlfriends were by the priest. They went to Catholic church after school because they were latchkey kids. Their mother was divorced, and so there was nobody home because she had to work. So they go over to the Catholic church, and they had things to do for the kids. But I never went. But both of those were molested by a Catholic priest. So I was very disgusted. Still, I was trying to understand religion. And I thought that everything was so unfair for so many people in the world. World War II, we had many relatives that were killed in Poland in the war. And one day I came into the kitchen, and the war was over only a few months, and there was a man sitting in the kitchen, and I came from upstairs, so I didn't know he was there. And he was sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, and he was talking to her about her sister in Poland. And he had medals all over. He was in his uniform. He was a colonel in the Polish army, and he came to America on government business, but he knew my aunt in Poland. And so he came to visit her sister, who she hadn't seen in many years. So that was my lifestyle. We were middle class. And so when that woman called at the house to do a back call back then on this girlfriend's mother who took a book from her. So, and the woman didn't want to talk to her anymore. So when the gal came back, she told her daughter to get rid of her, and she didn't want to do it. I did it. The witness, I didn't even know the name of what religion she was, but she started talking to me about the Lord's Prayer, which is a real Catholic thing, and about the kingdom. Well, she showed me that there was hope for the future and for everybody. And so I asked her to come to my house, which was about a block away. She came that evening, and she stayed. We asked all kinds of questions, but we never asked what religion. And so then my mother was quite pessimistic about life anyway, because she said, just as soon as you get old and smart, you die. So, yeah, so that was the way she kind of raised us. And I thought life was very unfair for so many millions of people, and especially um, the concentration camps. We were very upset over all of that. I heard it day and night when I was a small child. So the witnesses really showed us, my mother and I, everything that they could on the optimistic things that the Bible says. So we were studying about 3 months, and I asked, what did they have? Did their religion have a name? And she said, yes, Jehovah's Witnesses. We had never heard of them. And yet we lived about 30 miles from the Yankee Stadium and the polo grounds in New York City. And that's where they had huge conventions. So it would have been the 1950 and 1953 conventions at the Yankee Stadium that we should have heard about, but apparently in our newspaper in Long Island didn't carry any notice about it at all. Most of the information about the assemblies back then were the local, like New York newspaper. But then I found out when I was in Bethel, mind you, and I was working on the Proclaimers book and the history of the organization, I found out that that the actual news on Jehovah's Witnesses was never carried out anywhere except around the Yankee Stadium building or the stadium. And that was an agreement made between the Watchtower officials and the newspapers. They had a special, you came out of the stadium and there were newsboys everywhere. And they were telling you and yelling at you to read about the convention. It was so thrilling because everybody was buying them so they could send them home or take the paper with them. Look at the coverage we got. Well, there wasn't any coverage. These were special newspapers made up just to sell to Jehovah's Witnesses. And it was an agreement between the New York News, the New York Mirror, and they made tremendous money on that. When I was looking at the archives at headquarters for my job, and I saw all of that, I was very shocked. So uh, it was dishonest, actually dishonest. And that's the way they always operated behind the scenes. They were running their so we were attending the convention, buying newspapers about the convention, reading them about the convention. We were there. So what did we need to know about? But the articles were made up at Bethel by the writing department. And one came out every day during the convention. So at that time, I didn't know all that, and I was so excited. I thought, oh, all my relatives out in Long Island got to know this. Well, nobody knew about it. So, but that didn't, I didn't know. And Mom and I was studying only 3, 4, 5 months. I don't know anymore. It's a long time ago. And the woman who studied with us invited us to Bethel to have lunch. And it's arrangements for the Bethel. There was 200 people then. When I went to Bethel many years later, there were 3,000.
Oh.
But at that time it was 200. So we ate in a large dining room. After our lunch was over, there was made an announcement to stay in our seats. And so after the prayer, and usually they dismissed you then. So we all sat there. And then Nathan Knorr, who was the president, he called out the names of about 7 young men and told them to come up to the head table where that's what they called it, where he and other members of the organization that were directors of the organization were sitting. And they stood these boys against a wall, mind you. And we were very curious, of course, of what was going on. So then he proceeded to lambast them, and he was very, very mean. And they had been at a party of witnesses out at Long Island, and they had drank whiskey, and they got a little inebriated. And of course, that would be a reproach on Jehovah's name. So he really lit into him. My mom told me when she was 80 years old, because we were out of the witnesses then. And so we were talking about the past, and I said to her something about, remember when we first went to Bethel to have lunch? She said that experience of talking like he did to those young men, she said, of course, they were young. You could be 16 and, of course, a young guy, and be accepted to Bethel. Of course, when my son went, the minimal age was 19. But then you could, but it was an exception to the rule at 16. So she said, kids always get into things. That's part of being a teenager. She said, I almost quit my study. She said, I was so horrified at the way he talked to them, that they would be killed at Armageddon and all that.
And
So,
how embarrassing, right? To say that in
oh,
front of all these people.
and most of them were young men. So he was making a lesson. He was teaching them what not to do. They did it anyway at that age. So I said, well, why did you not leave? She said, because of you. She said, you were so excited about it. She said, I said, yeah, but if you were so unhappy with it, she said, well, I knew you'd run away if I stopped you. And she was right. I would have. And I would have gone to the witnesses, and they would have. And here I was only studying by that time 6 months or so. But the woman who was studied with me, she would have taken me in. You know how we felt about saving lives, you know. So she said, I knew that. So I stayed in. But she said, over the years, I got to like the people and the honesty, and I had a community. And I liked the idea of living forever. But she never really was that zealous. So anyway, I was just so happy with this. By the time I was 14, I got baptized. And then I was studying with people. I went door to door. Every minute I had that I wasn't in school or doing homework, I was going door to door on my own. And I studied with one woman who was Arthur Murray ballroom dance teacher. And she taught me how to ballroom dance, by the way. And we taught, and she'd come out and we'd invite Bethelites to the house. And my father and mother our house had a finished basement. And so she would come to the house because I studied with her and she became a witness, even though her husband said if I ever came back there to their house after my first visit, he was going to kill me. And I went back anyway. I said, well, I'm going to have a resurrection. So I went I was really thrilled with this whole deal. So then, so we had a nice life, and since we lived so close to Bethel, we invited these young men out. By the time I was 16, my family moved to Miami from Long Island. I had 3 proposals, marriage proposals, by the time I was 16, because I looked older, because I was very into everything. I played the accordion,
Cool.
English.
Yeah, yeah.
My grandfather played 3 or 4 instruments, and so I was interested in following his steps. And so it was a nice life. Then they moved to Miami. And after a year in Miami, I was finished with school, and I teamed up with two other young girls, and we put in an application to go where the need was greater. Society sent us to Mississippi, and it was a college town. It was where the university was of Mississippi, and all the part-time jobs were taken. And we were there to pioneer, so we had to
Mhm.
get a part-time job. So we lasted about 3 months, and then we had to go home. Well, rather than go home, we had found out this was 1959. And so we found out that there was going to be this gigantic convention in New York at Yankee Stadium in the Polo Grounds. So we decided to go up there and help. And we did. We worked at Bethel. Two of us worked at Bethel, and we recorded all the rooming assignments. There's 250,000 people came. They all needed rooms, so the witnesses were going door to door asking if someone could stay with them uh, in the city, you know. And
Okay.
so we were at Bethel recording all this on the typewriter. And so everybody gets assignment where to live. That's when I met my husband. So
Okay.
I met him in the spring of 1998, and his mother had moved from Dallas, Texas, mother and father, and moved to Long Island, the same congregation that I was in before I left to Miami. So I came back, I was going to the same congregation. So I met her, and she liked me, and she picked me out for her son and told him that she meant a blonde. She says, "It's a blonde in the congregation, and you're going to like her." And so she had a party at the house, and it wasn't big, but it was nice. And so it was about 5 girls and 5 guys from Bethel. This was in 59. I
Nice.
met him the big convention was in 58.
Okay.
Yankee Stadium, 250,000 people, and the Polo Grounds.
Okay.
So, uh, uh, but he had another year and a half to stay at Bethel because he signed up for that. So I went back to Florida and tried to put a life together for us. So I went to work and bought a small trailer because we were wanting to go in the circuit work. And usually back in those years, that would happen when you marry a Bethelite. And uh, so then I got pregnant after a year, and that was the end of my hopes. But off and on, my husband and I pioneered for years and years, and he was very involved with the organization. So
Okay. And then you ended up going back to Bethel, or you ended up going to Bethel and you ended up in the writing department, right?
yes, we went to visit our son who went to Bethel when he was 19. And a year later, we went to visit him. And when we did, my husband met all those years he hadn't seen many of the young men 20 years before that he was in the press room with. And so he operated one of those giant presses of printing magazines. So we went to see our son, and he was in the same area where his father had been all the years before, even had the same locker that his father had 20 years before. So when we went to see him, my husband, who was a licensed plumber, saw the man who was head of the press room uh, years before, and still he was assistant to the whole factory, running the whole factory of the society. So my husband was kidding him, and he says, "You don't need an old person at Bethel nowadays, do you?" And he was not serious. And the man, Richard, said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" And Joe told him. Well, see, nobody knew except people like the man Joe was talking to, plus a few others, that they had just purchased the humongous 1 million square foot building on the waterfront. They also purchased the Bossard Hotel, and they needed plumbers desperately. The buildings were in very bad shape. And also they needed plumbers to teach plumbing to young men who were brought in. So they interviewed us officially that afternoon, and then told us that they wanted us to come in. We went home. It was June of 82. We went home, put our world into hold, and headed back to Bethel a month later. And we were there for almost 11 years. And so I was then assigned, first of all, to tape duplication, because that's where all the women of the husbands that they needed. And when they brought the specialists, like the lawyers in or the engineers in, the wives who, they were witnesses, but most of them didn't work. And so they didn't know what to do with them. So anyway, they had this department where you made Bible tapes, and in those years you'd buy at the Kingdom Hall a Bible tape. So I was put in the department where they made them, and me and about 30 other young women. And that's what I did, but I was allergic to the chemicals used, and so they put me in shipping. And from shipping, I heard that through a man that I had, when I was engaged to Joe, I was going door to door, and I met a young woman, and she came into the organization. And so then when she moved away, I never saw her again. And years and years and years later, she comes into Bethel and with a man traveling with her. And my husband, who had met her on one of his vacations to Florida when we were engaged, and he, back then for $20, you could get a clergy pass on the plane. So that's how he came from Bethel to West Palm Beach. And on his vacation days, he would split them up. And so when I was still studying with her, he met her. And so here is years and years later, and he sees her coming into through the front door, and it's that woman. And we find out later that she became a witness. She was moved up to upstate New York, and she met a architect and married him. She became a witness. I had no idea about this. So she becomes a witness, and she witnesses to him. He converts. They're so zealous. They're even written up in the yearbook back then, because they used to go island hopping. They actually built a trimaran, and they'd go in the Caribbean and witness.
Wow.
But her name was different. I wouldn't have known because she's married. And so that woman comes into Bethel with her architect husband. They wanted him desperately at Bethel as an architect. And so when we get together again and we see each other, all that was wonderful. So he tells me when I'm in shipping that they got to have a need for people who have experience in construction and also in the offices. And I had a background. I was working part-time and then full-time, and before I went to Bethel, because we had bought an old house and we were remodeling it. So I had a lot of experience in cost accounting, and this is construction cost accounting. So then, and this man that she married, Alan, he knew because I told him. So he told the fella who was over the worldwide construction work of Jehovah's Witnesses about my experience. And then he tells me that they want to meet with me, and they did. And the next thing I knew, I got an invitation to be interviewed by the overseer of engineering construction, and there are eight men sitting around a table who met with me and wanted to hear my past experiences. So they were all engineers and architects, but mostly engineers. So the overseer was a real grump, and I don't really, he was married, but Anyway, so they all interview me, and I had the practical experience of what they needed. So I found out later that 8 of them had voted that they wanted me in the department. And they never do that at Bethel. But this was such a secular thing. They had to revert back to that kind of thing to get experienced people in different worldly type apartments. So, but I found out later that the overseer turned me down. So there was 9 men. 8 of them said, yeah, we want her. The overseer didn't want me. And you know why?
Because you're a woman?
Oh, it wasn't only that. I was overqualified.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Overqualified. Yeah, it had to do with being a woman.
Sure.
But anyway, I go into engineering. I'm eventually, I knew bookkeeping, I knew shorthand, I knew things like that. But I was experienced because the man that I worked for on the outside, he was building a development in where we moved to in Tennessee, where the need was greater. And so I worked on all kinds of aspects of that. And so it was very, very interesting. Eventually, I became the assistant to by this time, Alan and his wife, she got sick. 4 years later, they had to leave Bethel. But there was another man there who was an architect. And I became, in the world, they would call you administrative assistant.
Yeah.
So that's what I was. During the time I was in that department for 6 years, I found out inadvertently that the assistant overseer of the department, he was doing something illegal.
Uh-huh.
And do you remember, you're young, but maybe you don't remember, but at one point, and this is in the 80s, every new Kingdom Hall that was built had to buy the same chairs. Every Kingdom Hall had the same chairs, and they would buy them from the same company. Well, this guy, he got the deal made. It was out of Canada. And guess what? He was taking 2% on every sale, every chair that was sold.
Oh, okay.
You know, if you've worked in the world, in certain occupations, if you're selling, you get 2%.
Okay.
I recognized that on some of his paperwork. Nobody else did because nobody else in the department had worked on the outside like I had. And so I knew what he was doing. And so he must have made a fortune. So eventually the department overseer and I got to be friends over the years. And he was very, very respectful and very nice. So during the time I was there, the somebody came down from writing. It was about the last year I was an engineer. And by that time, I was very involved in research because all of Brooklyn Heights was an area called landmarks. And that means that all the buildings there, you couldn't change a window. You had to have it approved by a historical society because that was a tremendously important historical area. I used to do research for them. Beside the other things I did, I'd leave Bethel during the day. If they needed to find out what a window looked like it 50 years ago in a building, before it got all broken and whatever, I had to do the research. And so I found things like that, like on the Bossert, they had big numbers, the street numbers on the building. And they originally in 1914, those numbers had disappeared, but it had to landmarks made us put the same numbers at the look. I did find a picture from 1914 of the building, and there was the numbers on the front of the building. So I did things like that. I was very, very happy with my job. And then one day somebody from writing came down we were on the third floor and writing was on the eighth. And so he asked me if I would write an article and on the expansion work. So I did. It was in the Awake. I don't have the book. I don't have it on. I've got it here, but I didn't open to the page. And so I wrote this article for the Watchtower writing department on the expansion. And then it was a number of months later that I was called up and interviewed in writing. And I had the qualifications they needed. So I was accepted there. But before I left, not I didn't do this when I knew I was leaving. I did this before I knew I was leaving. Months and months before, I went forward with my information about the thievery. It wasn't only this one, there were others that were making money off of the organization. I called up the department that was handling. There's all kinds of different departments that all work for finance at Bethel, So I called up to find out if on cost accounting, and I asked a question of the woman who handled accounts payable. And when I did that, I found out that they never had any bookkeeping at all to account for the operation of Bethel.
Wow.
How can you exist without that?
Yeah.
Well, they never had it. And so when I went forward, I brought that out to the person and other elders, overseers, and talk about this. And they didn't know. Nobody knew what was going on. In fact, the head of the construction work in the United States told me a week later, he called me into his office and he told me that there was a lot of thievery in the organization. And basically, the weekend kingdom halls they were building, that eventually stopped because they couldn't control the ceiling. So, but that didn't make me leave the witnesses. It just made me think a lot of my brothers and sisters were crooks.
Yeah, and nobody sought to, blow the whistle on this before?
Oh, in fact, this man told me that in Europe, but really in the 80s and early 90s, they were building branches. And so they buy a big uh, um, equipment, a humongous crane, and then they would move it to another country in Europe and for the next build. And he said many times it never showed up. Huge equipment just would disappear.
Wow.
So uh, I, I guess they figured money would be coming in, but they were in very bad financial conditions those days. And they had 9 banks that they dealt with. And eventually I found out that most of their banking was, they were paying interest only. They were borrowing tremendous money and paying interest only until 2008,
Wow.
when banking issue in
Oh,
the
yeah.
United States.
Yeah.
And then all the money was called in.
Okay.
The banks wanted the full amount of money, and that's what I was told. Now, somebody who might have been there at that time might differ from me, but that's what I was told, and it fit. It really fit from what I knew. So, I just figured that these people who were at Bethel loved Jehovah very much, but they sure didn't know much about the operation of what they consider Satan's world.
Yeah.
And so they had problems. And in writing, I was told right away that I would be working on a book that would have the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. And sure enough, I was 3 years on that book, the Proclaimers book.
Yeah.
So I worked on I worked all over that because my assignments were from the writers. So they wanted this and that because they were working on this chapter or this particular information. So I would be the one, beside them, they would try. We didn't have the internet then, you know.
Right. It's hard.
So one guy was always assigned to go to the library who worked in writing. So every Wednesday he would go to the 42nd Street, I think it was, massive library to pick up books for the writers. He also was the one that would go every week to the United Nations. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
yes, and that when that scandal broke, uh, yeah, I could remember the days on Wednesday. He put on his door, "Gone to New York to the library." It wasn't until years later he could have put "Gone to the UN." Well, he said he would, that was important to find out what was going on in the United Nations. And he said he got to be at some of the big meetings, and it was very important as an observer. I found out later he didn't tell me the truth because observers are not allowed into the big hearings.
Yeah.
So, uh, but you see, it Watchtower is a publishing company, and the UN welcomed publishing companies. There were just any news company, any companies that were involved with news could they didn't join uh, they didn't become part of the UN. Um, so, but they were NGOs and the non-governmental. Um, that's the words that we use with these people. Non-government organizations, and they considered Watchtower a non-governmental organization. Years later, I asked a woman who worked for the UN who had been uh, a witness, and I said, how come that they accepted Jehovah's Witnesses into the as a non-governmental organization? Didn't they know about Jehovah's Witnesses and their stand on the war and that a stand on the United Nations even? And she said no. She said they didn't know because the Watchtower put in an application. Actually, the man that went in every week, he filled out the applications and had the governing body member and one from the service department sign it. So she said, no, the big sign on top of the building said Watchtower. So they put through their application in the name of the Watchtower. She said, nobody here knew it was Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh,
So it's a backstory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it true too that it seems like I remember some tracks that they had to put the UN symbol on um, the some tracks, some brochures or something. It was like a requirement.
Well, I don't know about that. I've never heard that, but I'm not saying it's not true because in certain countries, the obligations are always different. Even to this day, if you're if you're a U.S. corporation and you go into another country, like the copyright of all the society's literature has been for just a number of years. Copyright of all of the literature is South Korea.
Yeah, I
It
saw that.
used to be the United States. Well, there's reasons for that, corporate reasons, and you get better breaks, maybe. But the Watchtower didn't pay any taxes. So what is the reason that they are doing that? I don't have a definite reason about South Korea at all.
Right.
Uh, but I re I remember what the letter that came when this was a big scandal about this governmental thing that the Watchtower is involved in, and it was in the newspapers and everything. So I remember it well, and how they tried to get around it. But it made a big hole in the organization of those who left. The man who went in every week, his name was Cyril. He he um he he gave me an Awake magazine that just came to our room, and I was at every 2 weeks before all the magazines are sent to subscriptions. The Bethelites would get in their room a copy, and so it was the Awake that had the cover was the globe, I think, of the United States. Anyway, I come into his office because I worked with him a lot, and he handed me the magazine and he said, have you read it yet? And I said, yes. I said, it's a good article because it's not like the usual. It's kind. It doesn't say that everybody who belongs to this is going to die, or it wasn't negative, it was positive. And he said, who do you think wrote it? And I said, I don't know. And I looked at him and I'm wondering why he asked. And I said, you did, didn't you? And he said, yeah. So he was going there every week. So he wrote that article, and it was kind about what the UN did. And then at the very end, it came in for the kill, but it wasn't as bad as we used to talk about it, going door to door. And I said, I said to him, that was such a good way to put it. Because after all, once people start studying, you can always tell them then that if you belong to it, it was it meant curtains for you. You know, you're gonna die. So we agreed. You know, it's all those little inside stories made life very interesting at headquarters. And
Did you ever feel like when you found out that they were part of the UN, did that wake you up a little bit or make you question your beliefs?
well, I found out I I didn't know while I was there. I knew he wrote it, but I didn't know they were NGO.
Okay.
That's a big difference. I was still a no, I was not. I was out of the witnesses when I found out that
Oh, okay.
it was in a newspaper out of England where it was revealed. All how they found out was this newspaper reporter. He looked up for some reason, he looked up the list of all the NGOs. And guess what? Watchtower was on the list. That's how I found out.
Wow.
So, but I was out, and I had discovered in 91 about the child abuse situation, and worked on that for almost 2 years. I still would have given my life to the organization because I figured they didn't know what they were doing. I was talking to victims on the phone, and the Awake editor was my source. He's the one who introduced me to the subject. He said, you're the only parent on the floor, meaning in the writing department, and you're the only mother here. And I have to talk. He said, if I talk to my wife, and he was a man in his 60s then, he said, if I talk to my wife, she dropped dead from shock. You just lived in oblivion in Bethel, and they get used to it. They've been there 40 years. And he said she'd be so shocked. So he's the one who slowly, before that, I had written some shorter Awake articles through him because he was an overseer of the Awake publishing, writing, and posting. So he asked me to fix up an article that came in from someone in the branch in Europe, and the article was on women. It was too it was interesting, but it was too personal. He thought it was much too personal, writing about women's health issues. So he asked me to read it. And when I did, I said, you know, I was against it. It talked about things that can't women have anything confidential about their body? Well, this guy who wrote this, I guess he had a wife going through menopause, and he told all about it. And they were going to put that article through, and I said, please don't. You know, that's
Yeah.
right. So that was the beginning of me fixing up some articles.
You did show me one that you did about women.
Yeah, the one I did here, I wrote that
Men
article.
deserving of respect. Yeah, that's good.
Yes. Now, there's a story behind this. Is uh, I'd like to tell it. My husband and I were in California. We At our table, there's 10 Bethelites sitting at every table from your son to where you eat. So you get to know the people at your table. My husband was the man who was overseer. They called him table head. That means he was law and order for the other 9. And uh, so one of the young men who was assigned at our table, we had some couples, and then we had a single guy, and he heard we were going to California because our son was getting married, and he was going to be married in New York, and he was going to California for his honeymoon. So he said, my parents live, they would love to, in California, they would love to host you. See, we had to go to California. The fella who was the elder, he told us that he had made a deal with a guy at headquarters to provide the the slides for Russell's creation. He in 1915, I think it was, and the Bethel wanted to borrow him. He said he lent him to them. He said, I never heard anything about him for all these many years. He says, 5 years, I've never heard of him. They were worth $100,000.
Oh, wow.
So he said, when you're there, this is the man we were staying with and his wife. He said, when you go back to Bethel, would you look into it and see where they went? So I asked one person, and then he asked another, and then men who were overseers of that would deal with that kind of thing. Did they ever see the slides? There was 200 of them. And so I asked the one over photography. He never saw them, but he was new to the department. So he asked his assistant. He said he didn't see him. So they go to the writing department. His assistant goes to the writing department to the man who's over our archives in the writing department, asks about, did he ever see him? Well, what I didn't know was this kind of thing was going on. So the man who was overseer of the writing department, he called me one morning. It was Saturday morning, and he said, I understand that you're asking about these slides. And I told him, yeah, I was. And he says to me, if you know what's good for you, you'll stop looking. So I got a threat.
Mhm.
So I went to see one of the governing body members that we knew quite well, Jack Barr, and I told him. He was astounded, especially since this man was a senior writer, and he also had just been made assistant to a governing body. And when I heard he was made assistant to the governing body, that's what propelled me, because I said, he threatened my life like the mafia. That's what I told.
Yeah.
And uh, so I was told, Jack told me, he said, I'm going to talk with that man. So he did, and he told him, he said, you apologize to Sister Anderson. Well, he never apologized to me. And there was some other things that happened, but nothing bad came out for me. I don't know what went on behind the scenes. And in another instance, so you can see that it didn't respect women. Also, this writer would actually put out the article on this Sisters of the Governing Body. He wrote that. It was a dishonest article. Half of the article wasn't true, and I knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um, in fact, he did it 3 times. He was the guy who said that by the year 2000, it all will be over.
Oh.
Yeah. Said that it was his article. And they weren't allowed to do that after the 1975 fiasco, where 500,000 witnesses left the organization over that. And so here the book of that we all had to follow in the writing department of rules, standards they called it, and it's you never ever to prophesy or tell or hint at when Armageddon would be here or the end would be here. And this guy put it in a magazine, and it caused a ruckus, a ruckus. People called from all over the place. So I went through that one. So on another trip I go on with my husband, we go to where my son is going to marry the girl, and they have a big assembly up there. It's Indiana. So we decided to go there and meet the parents of the girl, which we did. And that was interesting. That is when um, another thing blew up. And so it was about a girl, and it was my daughter, the girl who became my daughter-in-law. It was her mother in the car with her husband and elder driving, and we're sitting in the back seat. So she all of a sudden pipes up about a Bible study she had. And her husband's warning her, be careful here. She said, I am not going to be careful. Barbara needs to know about this. She's in the writing department. She's a woman. And she told me about go door to door and met a young woman who was a witness when she was a kid. And she reactivated her, and the woman became a witness and a pioneer. She was single. She was cleaning houses while to make a living while she pioneered. And the witnesses were usually the ones who some of them had their house cleaned. So she was cleaning this guy's house, and in the middle of the afternoon, he never came home from work. He came home from work that afternoon, and
Oh.
so she did not know anything about what happened to her until she got pregnant. She found she was pregnant. And when she found she was pregnant, her all of a sudden she remembered she had pushed all this away because in Jehovah's organization, and we had back in those years, repressed memories was a thing. Apparently, she had that,
She
and
never went to the police.
oh no, no, she went to the elders, and there again she's pregnant, and so she they have a judicial hearing, and so he says it was consensual. She said it was not. It was, and he kept saying it was consensual. Well, she was his fellowship for lying. He was not.
Well, he should have been disfellowshipped at least for having sex.
He wasn't. Because he repented.
Oh,
See the sin of repentance on behalf, and that's my argument all these years. And I got plenty of people to back me up. And that business of sin taken to the elders, especially with men who have a position in the organization, and so they have to. The judicial hearing entails seeing if the person is repentant. If they don't confess, that's a different story. A bit.
how did
But
they think she wasn't repentant if they thought she did it?
no, nobody asked. It was so bad. It was so awful when if you're there and you heard the story and hear my daughter-in-law's mother, or my to-be daughter-in-law's mother. She's horrified by this, and so are many of the other women, especially to punish the girl. And so I came back with a story and I told the Awake editor, and at the same time, there was a very forceful writer in his office talking with him. And I knocked on the door, and it's Monday morning. I'm back from the weekend and from Indiana. And they told me to come in and they're talking. And so I said, I got a story to tell you. So they said, okay, we want to hear it. So I told them about this. I'll tell you, both of them were furious. Both were happily married men for years and years. The Awake editor told him, you, Barbara, take on an article, and we want a respect for women. And so that's the point. I worked with a senior writer on this article. Now, there's other articles. There was one on difficult children. I wrote the entire article on difficult children and did the research on that one. I did the one on the 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. I learned a lot about constitutional law, which I absolutely love, the education I got. And there was another article attached to that one that I did interviews for and did that. Over the years, we were on the cover of the magazine 3 times. So
Wow.
it was okay. I mean, we never thought to, I don't know, it's just the way it was. I never felt like I was anybody special. It was all done for Jehovah. And this is the one, I'm in the cover of the,
Oh, yeah.
and
Mhm.
so that was funny one. This is a funny one. This is in the middle of winter. And see the green grass? Well, that was phony grass. And in the back, if you look real carefully, you see different color. Well, it was snow on the ground there. And we were freezing. We were at a cemetery.
Oh, wow.
All of us were at a cemetery. And we were making jokes to warm us up. So it was it was um it was funny. It was really funny. We're supposed to be all solemn over this. So when they went to make the cover, do the cover, everybody's laughing. And then once in a while, some were not laughing, or I'd be laughing or
Oh,
telling jokes. So what happened was that they finally got a picture where everybody except me is solemn. I had just told a joke. I am a jokester. And so they took my head off of the picture that I was serious when they were taking many pictures. So I was very serious in one, but there was other people laughing. So this is the only picture they could put together that everybody was serious except me. So they took my head off the other picture and put it here. So that's why if you look closely, my head is like this because they didn't put my head on right.
oh, that's funny.
So yeah, it was a nice life. There was a lot of wonderful people there, and they were our friends. And people are people, and there's problems with people. I've often said over the years, this would be a wonderful world if it wasn't for people.
That's true.
So
Make
but the child abuse eventually was the end for me.
yeah.
And
So tell us about that. Like, how did you start realizing there was a problem with this?
well, when the Wake editor asked me to talk to victims, and so I was on the phone, I heard horrible, horrible stories. I mean, I didn't even know enough about child abuse, what's done to children. In fact, I've got to tell you, this is the honest to goodness truth. The majority of the children in Jehovah's Witnesses organization were boys,
Oh,
just like in the Catholic Church.
okay. I
Yeah,
did not know that.
yeah, it was been publicized.
Right.
So, um, and then we know that because of when I appeared on Dateline after that, The two attorneys that were working on that case, that was the settlement of the $12.5 million case with 16 victims and 9 cases. And so the two attorneys that were working on that took the phone calls after the program. That was after Dateline. So afterwards, it was a big lawsuit. And
What year did you do the Dateline?
2002, May 28th, 2002. And I got stories about that behind the scenes. That is fascinating. And but 2007 is when we were involved. I wrote the 100-page commentary that is on my website about, we found out things because I bought 5,000 pages, paid $1 a page for every transcript of the court trials. And when we got these transcripts, there was stuff in there that nobody knew. And that's how we started figuring out how much the service department and the legal department were not telling the truth.
Yeah.
And or what they were doing behind the scenes. So
And what year did you leave Bethel and say, I've had enough?
well, I left okay, so as time went on, of course, Dateline and the others, the big settlement, I was out. But getting out, I was home after Bethel. I left in the 92, came home. I worked for them 4 more years. So I even have a paper on that where they said so, that I was part of the Bethel family, even though I wasn't there. And so as time went on, the Saudi didn't do what I thought they should do. And I eventually was so angry over all of this. And we did ask for them to do certain things. I interviewed on the phone from this house people from across the world over this child abuse stuff. And I talked to a woman from Africa who called, and she said that in her congregation in Africa, baby, and I said, what do we, because she was a psychologist. And so I said, and that's who I talked to mainly. Over the years, I've talked to 20 Jehovah's Witnesses who were in the mental health field. And what I heard was awful. So that Awake Editor and I decided that I would write and put it together, a package for the governing body on child abuse. And I did. And it was about this high. And 2 weeks after I left Bethel, he gave a copy to each governing body member. Well, he was a good friend of Sydlik, Dan Sydlik. And Dan already knew about the problem because the Awake Editor told him. Also, Swingle. Swingle was another friend, and Swingle knew about the problems. But we stayed away from Jairus. Jairus, he couldn't care less. In fact, as far as we knew, he was a molester.
Mm-hmm. And
And
so there was one of the governing body members that was removed from being governing body. He wasn't disfellowshipped, but he was just
that was
stepped down because of his own, because he,
Theo Greenlee's.
okay,
That's his obituary.
okay.
Blew it up. He died in 88. We were at Bethel only a year or so when they had made an announcement that he was leaving Bethel, but nothing was said badly about him. And then we find out later that he molested a kid around 7 years old out in Long Island, and the father came into Bethel and told the other governing body members if they don't get rid of him, he was going to the press. Eventually, that boy grew up and he went public himself in certain groups, he went public.
So the
So
governing body members, you've had some issues with them as well. And I had also heard that there was Macmillan may have been as well.
it is thought so, but Macmillan was a mystery. I knew him. I met him, by the way. That he was from years before when I was a new witness in the 50s.
Right.
Uh, he'd come to our congregation in Long Island and give talks.
Yeah.
So I met him, and he had, if you were to read his birth certificate or some of his private stuff, which I have, you find out that when he was in Bethel, there was a 6-month-old kid he had at Bethel, mind you. But he was like the right-hand man of Russell. And he thought, and it was also said back then, that he was going, if Russell died, Macmillan would be the head of the organization. And I have a paper that he wrote. He wrote it was almost like a mini book, and I have it. And it's all about those early years. We all thought initially that he was a single man at Bethel. But let me tell you, there were two men, and when they were taking the census, and I have the census from one year when Russell was alive and things were looking pretty good for him. I think he was divorced then, and Macmillan was his buddy. So on that census, it and this is Macmillan saying this to us. He says there were two divorced men on the census, and he says I'm one of them, and Russell was the other.
Oh.
Yeah, 100, less than 100 people at the Bethel at that time, probably 60, 70, of maybe more. I'd have to pull that paper out. I've had it for years. And the two of all the people, two of them, both of them went to force. So when I saw him years later, and he was coming into that's when I was single and working at Bethel back and forth over the pre-convention work. And he gave a talk at our Kingdom Hall. And he mentioned privately to me and somebody else, and he said that he said, if by the requirements of today, so that was 58, and he says, if the requirements by today of whether you could remarry and hold a position, he said, I would never be a servant. That was when they were servants. They weren't elders. He said, congregation servant. He said, because back then we didn't have those requirements about certain things about marriage. Now, I'm a researcher on the Russells. I was introduced to that subject when I was working on a chapter in the Proclaimers book, and I got knee deep into the history of the Russells. I've been writing a book for years on them.
Oh, cool.
I just am so busy with everything else, I can't get through it. I got 13 chapters written. The research I did on the Russells my 8 cabinets are full of it. And that is extraordinary, a life story. And I got everything. I even interviewed when I left the organization, I decided that I was going to go to college. And I was 58 years old when I left.
And
So
you left because of the
child
CCA
abuse.
problems.
Yeah.
You woke
So,
your husband up too?
oh yeah, no, 4 years later he left.
How did you get him to wake up?
He did it on his own. He started to well, he's an elder.
Right.
And
So
he
he
was
knew about the abuse problems.
he was very interested in everything I found out. He went to an elder school. Um, it was after I was out of the organization, and he saw a man who was teaching the elder school, and it was 200 elders there, and it was being taught by a Bethelite. And so in Nashville. And when my husband walked in, he had known this man for years and years. And he says, I hear Barbara's no longer a witness. And my husband said, yes, she isn't. It's over child abuse. So my husband says to the man, and who was in the service department at the time, and he says, Woody, he said, child abuse is a crime, and we're not handling it like that. We're handling it as a sin. So anyway, at the end of it's 2 days later, when they closed out the class, the man's his finished remarks at after the class was over to the group before this had the prayer. He said, brothers, if anything you've learned at this school, he said, it's child. He said, it is a crime. Keep that in mind. And for years, they didn't keep it in mind until now they say it, but they have ways of getting around it. And I'm not here to talk about that, but I know what they're doing. And so, same thing Catholic Church has been doing for years. How they hide it is very fascinating and very can make me as angry as they be. Because listen, I've talked to so many victims over the years. If anybody did that to me, myself, if that's how awful it is, I couldn't have survived somebody doing what so many of these people do to the children.
Yeah. And some of them do end up doing that. They end up.
Yes, they do. And later on, and that's what we're trying to help them so they don't commit.
Did you write, you said, so you get back to, you went to college, but before that, did you write a letter of disassociation?
No, I was disfellowshipped.
Oh, they just disfellowshipped you. And why did they disfellowship you?
Well, it was right before, it was like 2 weeks before I was on Dateline. And
Oh,
what led up to it, I was filmed on Dateline a year before it was actually put on television. All of us, the program we were supposed to be on television on November of that year of that was what let me see 2000, yeah, in 2001. But that's when 9/11 happened in November or September. So they postponed it. NBC postponed it. That's why they didn't show it until May of the next year. So I had written a private letter to a former Bethelite who was in the circuit work for years. And he and his wife had eventually had 2 children. And they went to the same congregation that Joe and I did in West Palm Beach. We lived in West Palm Beach for 18 years before we moved to Tennessee, where the need was greater. And I was a very active witness there. So this man was in the circuit work, and they had their kids, and they settled in West Palm Beach. Finally, they came from up somewhere else. And so when they settled, we got to know him. He was a troubleshooter for the state of Florida and half of Georgia. So he knew what was going on in the organization. And we knew him well. So I'm out of the organization. He left I'm out years after. He left in 1980 with his family.
wow.
We go to Bethel in 82. And I tell the Henschels, the governing body Henschels, because they knew him. This guy was so smart. He was on the translation of the New World Translation before it ever was released. At 16 years old.
Wow.
Yes, Greek. And so anyway, he's shocked when he finds out years later that I'm out of the organization. And anyway, I write him a personal letter describing the last year or so, and of being what I did in Bethel and some of the inside stuff that I knew. Well, he sent that letter off to a friend of his. He made some changes in a personal letter, which I'm glad he did. and he had great grasp on the English language, and he took some of my words and put big long words for my words. So he sent it off to a friend of his, and that friend of his sent it to a discussion board, and it published it on Free Minds back in those years. So that's, remember, that's 2001. And when they did that, somebody sent it into Bethel. Well, there had to be an apostate or a lover of the witnesses, all these kind of people dealing on this discussion board. Apparently, there was a loyal Jehovah's Witness who took this letter and sent it to Bethel. They sent it to the congregation, and I'm criticizing the Bethel on the headquarters. And my husband is sitting in a meeting of all the elders as this letter is being read about his wife. And so he comes home and tells me about it, and they have to make a copy of it. And they're holding it up to the elders. Well, they hand it to me, and I look through it, and I said, there was changes made in this. I say, yes, I read this. But I said, I didn't write that word. I don't even know what that means. And, I broke it down. I said, you can't do anything about this because you broke copyright. Whoever did this is copyright law.
Yeah.
And so they just fellowshipped me over that letter is really what they did. And they waited till approximately the week before Dateline aired. So then when the witnesses, who I call to this day, the friends would watch, whoever would watch it would think I was a liar because I wrote that. So I'm disfellowshipped. And they would say, oh, don't believe her. She's a liar. She's disfellowshipped. So my husband, that summer, he talked to the elders. He'd been saying things behind the scenes and watching. I'm out of the organization for 4 years. And then I'm disfellowship. I say that I have a very low profile. And he's studying religion. He said, I always wanted to know about the source of religion. So he buys every book on the market that has to do with the history of religion. And then, but he still goes to all these elders meetings and whatever.
And
So,
he was still believing Jehovah's Witness at the
well,
time.
the thing is, I thought he was. And so after it's over and I'm disfellowshipped, and that's a story too. Oh, yeah, the press was waiting outside the building. When they had the judicial hearing with me, they couldn't do anything about that letter. And so they didn't disfellowship me over that. And wrote the society wrote back and told them to go ahead and disfellowship me anyway. So they made an announcement to the elders. And he comes home and he tells me, you're going to have your judicial hearing on Friday. I said, oh, goody, I can't wait. And so I go there, and it was too funny for words after a while. So I said, it was, they found me guilty in effect. But the last elder to interview me is, I have the 3 elders.
Yeah.
I know that elder. He had become and it moved in while I was out of the organization and almost 4 years. So I have a low profile. Nobody knows anything about me. And so he says, I said, I got to go. I said, I've been here, sitting here all this time. I said, I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm going to go. I wasn't afraid of him. They were just people. I didn't care if they disfellowshipped me at all. So, in fact,
But they'd already decided they were going to before you walked in the door.
Yeah. So I said to this guy, he says, I want to ask you a question before you go. I knew what the question was. He was going to ask me how did I feel about the governing body, because that's a rule. So I said to him, okay, but before you ask me the question, I want to tell you something. And I said, I vowed to Jehovah that if they don't do if your people don't do anything about this child stuff, I vowed never to cross the threshold of a kingdom hall again. And I said, you made me break my vow by coming here. And I got up and walked out. Well, outside, I had notified the press what was going to happen. There was the press waiting. Jairus was furious. I heard about it afterwards. He was so furious. So then the letters came to the different kingdom halls about the press, and don't tell anybody where the judicial hearings are, otherwise the press will be. Oh, it was a riot. So after they then disfellowshipped me, and I appealed it. And then when I appealed it, they sent my lawyer a letter and told him they weren't going to have it at a kingdom hall. My appeal, they were going to have it at a motel. Okay, so my attorney writes back and he says, Mrs. Anderson is not going to be at that motel where you're having this meeting. She doesn't meet in a motel with 6 men.
Yeah.
So, so they went ahead and disfellowshipped me. I didn't care. But later on, I had to call that motel over something else. And I said, by the way, I mentioned the meeting that hey, had to reserve the rooms. And this woman who was answered the phone, she says, you know what? She said, those people that came here, those 6 men that were here, reserved the room. She said that they never paid the bill.
Work.
So, but I asked my husband, I said, after it was over, and I said, how come we didn't divorce those for 4 years?
Yeah.
And I said, I was out. Usually when one mate leaves, the other
Yeah.
doesn't appreciate that. And it ends up a divorce. And it was so funny. He says to me, well, he says, you didn't know this. He said, but the first 3 years I was still a witness. He said the fourth year, I made up my mind, this is not God's organization. I said, why didn't you tell me? I said, a whole year and I didn't know that you weren't a believer. He said, well, I was working behind the scenes trying to save your ass.
Oh,
That's a curse word.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the first 3 years, he did believe. I'm
Oh, he
surprised he
went to all
didn't
the
want.
meetings. He took my mother. She was still a witness. Took my mother to the meetings and conventions and whatever. But he was watching everything. He was really. He says to me, "This is your story." He was always kind to me. Always. We never fought on. Sometimes he would even ask me, "What'd you find out?" He said, I wanted to know. What you were studying I was studying the Russells.
Yeah.
When I went to college, the reason I went to college is I said, um, I didn't go because of the
Yeah.
Watchtower
You're not
and
supposed to.
education. So I said, I had a problem with something with Russell, and I couldn't locate the answer with Russell. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go over and take the test for the college because they have scholarships. And I said, if I find out that Russell lied, he was being asked about an affair. And I said,
Right.
if he lied, then I'm going to write a book on the Russells. I had gone to college and then I finished my scholarships. And then I had to make up my mind, did I want to continue without a scholarship, pay for university education?
Mm.
And so then I had to make up my mind. And when I found out uh, that he did lie, I decided to write the book.
Oh,
Uh, and I didn't go back to college, so I only got 2.5 years. That's all my scholarships covered, but they were wonderful. And plus the fact that I really realized I had skills I didn't know.
yeah.
It gave me a sense of one of the professors uh, had me stand up in a class, and he asked me if he had permission that he could use an essay I wrote. Uh, and I was so embarrassed because all credit goes to Jehovah. And even though I was out, I still was mind manipulated. And I was so ill at ease standing there in front of the whole class. And he was going on about it was only, uh, few hundred words, but eventually I got that article in the newspaper. It was about my family,
Yeah.
my father and mother, and he said it was so well done. So I got to feeling like I was worth something. As a woman in the organization, I don't care what I did at Bethel about that. I still knew that I was a female. And even when there were problems in the writing department. One woman tried she was stealing out of my office, library books and stuff. And when they were disappearing, I couldn't return them. And I didn't know where they were going. And I found out later it was a gal in the writing department. She wanted my job. When the fat hit the fan on that, that was interesting to watch. So I said, um, when I was taken into writing, one of the writers said to me, he says, and this is the same woman that took me around and introduced me to everybody in the writing department. And so when I got to his office and he said, "Oh, congratulations, you're in the writing department." He says, people here at Bethel would kill to be in the writing department. And I laughed and I said, "Oh, come on there."
Yeah.
He said, "I'm serious."
Yeah.
He was serious.
Yeah.
They're people and they're worse. Now, some of them would never. They're wonderful people.
Right.
The man who was the head over the Pennsylvania Corporation, he was a wonderful man. My supervisor of my job in writing on the Proclaimer's book was his fleshly brother. They were very good people. They had their quirks, like we all have quirks. But I got along basically once this thing cooled down with this girl. They threw her out of the department, by the way, and her husband was in the very prestigious department at Bethel, and they both left Bethel.
Wow.
But I found out about 2 years later that she was beautiful. She made the cover of the Awake many times, and she was only somewhere in her 30s. And then I found out that she was molested.
Ah, so many people have been.
Yes,
Uh,
too many. So
Yes.
that basically goes my life. And since I left it and went forward on Dateline, I have been extremely busy, extremely. And
What year did your husband leave, and did he get disfellowshipped as
yeah,
well?
yeah, yeah. He in the summer of uh, a few months after I was disfellowshipped in 2002, in July, he wrote a resignation letter. It's on my website. He wrote that. I had nothing to do with it. It's beautiful. And he gave a copy and sent a copy to every head in our congregation, the head of the family. Even if it was a woman who was the head of the family, she got it. All the elders got it. And so then the arrangements were made for his judicial hearing. And so he was disfellowshipped in the summer of
And
that
what was the reason that they found apostasy, I guess?
causing divisions, same as mine.
Oh,
I was disfellowshipped before I caused any divisions. I
yeah.
was disfellowshipped before Dateline. Nobody knew I existed. I didn't cause any problems.
They wanted to keep you, they wanted to shut you up.
Oh, of course. It's amazing to me here, this is so many years later. It's amazing to me how many people told me and have been telling me that they watched it.
Yeah, yeah, I did. I
Yeah,
watched it when I was a believer and I thought you were lying.
yeah, they did, but then they thought about it afterwards. I had one that said she thought about it for years. So, um,
Well, I'm glad you were able to get your husband out and your mom too. How did your mother wake
Oh,
up?
she did. Well, when I left Bethel and when I was home for a while, I wasn't home. I guess I was maybe home a year. I was telling her about the child abuse. And she is the one who told me about the man who, in the congregation, who was a molester. And my husband didn't even know. The elders didn't tell my husband. When we came back from Bethel, my husband is an elder, and he's on the service committee and whatever. And nobody told him. This was our best friend. It was the reason we moved to Tennessee. We came up to Tennessee from West Palm Beach to for the wedding of one of this man and this woman that we had known for years. We came to the wedding, and we loved it up where I live now. We bought a house, and it was the best thing we ever did. We were so great. We didn't even have that much money because we were always pioneering back then. And so he gave us lent us the down payment for this property. And because we had some property in West Palm Beach that had to be sold. So until it gets sold, we didn't have the down payment for this. So he lent us that. We were very close, but nobody told us that while we were away that he had molested a girl. So but my mother knew. A pioneer went door to door, and she had on her list to deliver a Watchtower and Awake magazine to a policewoman. And so she was doing that for quite a while. And they called this guy locally, his first name was Russ, and he was a window washer. And he was in his 60s or 50s, late 50s, early 60s. They moved here from Erie, Pennsylvania, where the need was greater 10 years before. So he knew everybody because it was a small town. It isn't anymore. But so anyway, this pioneer was going door to door, and then she said, I'm gonna well, she meets this policewoman, places magazine, it's on her route. So she goes a year later, and she gives the woman the magazines. And the woman says, oh, you know about Grandpa Russ, don't you? And the pioneer says, no. And she's an accountant. She's pioneering for years, but she's no dopey lady. She's smart and speaks well. And so she says, I don't know anything. And she says, well, I went into work and yesterday morning, and she said he was sitting in there, had arrested him for child.
Oh, wow.
And so she told the elders, and they did nothing about it. So she told my mother, and nobody else. And so when we came back to Bethel from Bethel, it took a while for my mother to tell me because you're not supposed to. It's illegal. You can't spread stuff like that. When my mother told me, I told my husband, and then the fat hit the fan. They still did nothing about him. He had been an elder forever. And so one day we're on a Sunday, the circuit overseer is visiting, and it's a young couple. They had been in Bethel a few years. They were in the circuit work, so they were only in their 40s. Very nice people. And so he finished up his closing remarks after the Watchtower, and then that was it. And I said, I got up to go to the bathroom, and as I was going to the back to the bathroom, Russ had a child on his lap, and I already knew what he had done. I was so furious, furious. I came back to the seat. Also, I had just seen they were having a Bible study. He and his wife were having a Bible study with a woman who had a little girl. She was about 4 years old. And they came in late for the meeting. They were new. And he was parking the car, and his wife had come in, and they had this woman and her little girl. Well, the little kid headed in the door. She was about 3, 4, headed in the door ahead of her mother. She ran right up to Russ and put her head in his genitals. And I saw that. I was standing in the back. And then at the meeting Sunday, and he's got a kid on his lap. So I told Joe I'd go back to my seat. I said, I'm going to see the circuit overseer. As soon as this is over, I said, don't be surprised. And he says, nothing surprises me with you. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm not
You
putting
gotta
up with
protect
this.
the children.
Yes. So as soon as the circuit overseer says his last words, I'm up there. I'm right in front of the microphone. He's up on the platform. You know, a prayer was over. He's picking up his papers, ready. I stand on the floor looking up at him, and I said, I want to see you. I want to see you in the next 5 minutes. Well, he and his wife knew we were former Bethelites, but that had probably been 4 or 5 years before. So I said, he says, what? I said, you come down here. You know, that took everything out of me to do that because I don't do like that. I had it. And so I started telling him. He was astounded. He gets back up on the in front of the microphone and he says, every man who has a position in this congregation, it's like 120 people, meet you in the back room.
Oh.
That's what, when that hit the fan, they removed him. And uh, there were so many.
I should have called the police, but they
You got it, girl.
did.
That's exactly, that was the other issue. I talked privately. Nobody knew what I worked on at Bethel. Nobody. In fact, one time before that, we had another circuit overseer, and he knew we had been in Bethel, and he was saying something about to me privately, and he was saying, "Hey, Barb," he said, "Well, the articles that you've been working on and things." He said, "What's a real interesting one?" And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm not. I can't talk to you about that." I said, "That's." Because he knew that I was still working on child abuse, and I wasn't in Bethel, but I was working at home. And so he says, "Oh, oh, and I shouldn't have asked you. I, it was shocking to see this man who looks, circuit overseer." And I said, because I took a vow, I was not to talk about what I was working on. I said, I'm so sorry, but I can't talk about that. And I thought he was going to have a heart attack. That I would report him. He was so controlled by this organization, and then as time went on, nobody knew. I talked to three three elders during the time that before I came out. And we knew them for many, many years, and I still didn't tell them when I worked on Bethel. I said to each one of them, they were not in our congregation, they were in the congregations near us. And I said, hey, by the way, all the years I was away, I said, there I've been listening and hearing this child abuse at times. Would you just tell me, all the while we were away at Bethel, did you ever see a case here in this area? I said that to each one separately. Did you ever see any here, sir, about abuse? And so I did that with 3 men, and it was 18
Oh,
total. And I even had said to them publicly that were public, not, I don't want to know anything about your secret meetings. I said public. And each one gave me enough public that hit the newspapers here in Tennessee.
wow.
Total 18. You know what I did? I wrote to Lloyd Berry of the governing body. That
Oh,
I wrote him a 4-page letter. And I said, enough is enough. I was very respectful. It's on my website.
what
Uh,
was his response?
Never. And when
He never responded.
never responded.
Mm.
And I was a witness at that time that I wrote him. So we had to go up there to Bethel to see our son. That was the time we went up there to see our son. And I saw him. He never mentioned to me. But I want to tell you, I know that he did something about it because after that, there was a letter that came to all the elders around the world. And that letter, and I also wrote the Awake editor. It's about the same thing. That letter had to be approved. The idea of that elder letter that went out to everybody who was an elder had to be approved by the governing body who was head over writing. So the Awake editor and he got their head together, and they had the service department write this letter. It was short and sweet, but it said, if any man in the organization who has a history of child abuse, he is never to hold a child in his arms at the Kingdom Hall.
Yeah. You shouldn't be around children at all.
What it said.
Ever.
And that was in response. So I know for Lloyd Berry to talk to me when I went up to him when we were visiting up there, see, that would be inappropriate. He would have never. I just said, hi, how are you? He said, I'm fine. Nice to see you here. That's all I said. But if he would have said, I got your letter, that would have been inappropriate. He was talking to a woman and he was acknowledging something that he shouldn't be talking. 97, there was such a marvelous article in the, it was Watchtower, Abhor Child Abuse. And that was written by the Awake editor. I know it was. And he wrote me a private letter after that. When all the elders had that, he wrote a private letter to me. And that letter was about the known molesters. Every congregation around the world had to, elders had to report a known molester. What that meant was somebody, it wasn't a guess. It was known in the community, known everywhere that he was either confessed or went to jail. And eventually he was repentant and was holding a position. So they asked 12 questions about him. The answers went to headquarters. And that's the letter that's caused a lot of confusion in the exjw organization. They say it's the legal letter that was from the society asking for all the database of elders, ministerial servants, but primarily elders that were known to be child. And it wasn't a legal letter, it was actually an employment letter. Because legally the society did employ all the elders. Vicarious liability applied all those years. They appointed the elders. It went to the governing body. Everybody knew that appointment up at the top, but see, they don't do that anymore. The ones who appoint them is the elders in the congregation. And then they tell the circuit overseer, and he sends a record up there. And right now, everybody thinks that's a huge database. No, it's a small database. There's basically two or more databases. I don't know, I worked on them. And the other databases, they accused, it's huge. Every big corporation has accused people. They haven't been proven guilty or not guilty.
Okay.
So you hear these, like the article in the Atlantic magazine, huge legal letter. The response from all the elders around the world was this big database. It wasn't a legal letter. It was basically to make a decision to leave him in or take him out of the job. There are those men in this organization that are known molesters, and were on that list that weren't after children. And I'll tell you exactly how that happened. This organization has a lot of almost adult young men in it. And over many, many years, this is what happened. They're 19, 20, they get engaged to a girl who's underage. See? So if she's under 18 or 18 and under, she's a child. Legally, she's a child. And and the parents, in many, many cases, we knew a couple actually that happened to. So they were ready to get married and they had sex. She was like 17. She's underage.
Mhm.
And guess what? The parents hate the guy and don't want the girl to marry him. And
Yeah.
the parents go to the police.
Oh,
He's a known molester. Got a record. Never touched a
not
child.
right.
They married. The couple we knew, they were married like 20 years, had grown children. But he had to be on that list. And so they had to make a decision at headquarters, a special department, to leave him in as an elder, presiding elder, or to remove him. Well, they would leave him in.
Mhm.
See, so it was tell us what they did, what he did, and should he be stayed in his position? Well, he was a very good man and beloved and never did anything except sex before marriage. And, you know, inflamed young people do that at times. And the organization punishes them. But who would think years later that there would be such a letter? But we know that I have another letter that absolutely, it's somewhere here. I've got it here. January 21st, 1999, body of elder letter from Jehovah's Witnesses, U.S. branch executive office. That's governing body territory in New York. The executive office sent out a letter, and it was sent to the branch office in Australia. It referenced the March 14th, 1997 body of elder letter saying, the March 14th, 97 letter was prepared with a view towards qualifications for appointed service and does not address legal obligations, including a duty to report.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's basically just asking uh, about their qualifications in the 12 questions and what did they do and should they be left in because they're really good elders.
Mhm.
And so, um, but see, nobody knew that. And so you had over the years is misunderstanding about this and thinking that they were asking, and in return, they got huge names, piles and piles of names. No, it would have been small anyway. It had to be. And I mean, you don't have that many elders anyway. So in each congregation. So in the Atlantic article, that was the information that given was wrong, and it's caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So uh, take things with a grain of salt with the Watchtower stuff that's behind the scenes. Uh, Something that stuff we'll never have answers to. But the best thing that we can ever do is just get out
Yeah.
of the organization. There's going to be more things. Europe problems in Japan,
Mhm.
considering
Heard
the
about that?
to take them and remove them from recognition. They remove the Moonies
Yep.
recognition.
Unity Church. They
Yes.
called it. Yeah.
So the churches are in a mess with child abuse. I had a call from a woman in California. She was head of the 5,000 members church of South Korea in California, asking me about child abuse and what are you doing? Because they're having such problems.
Mm.
These predators know where to go.
Yeah, that's true.
Churches.
I think they can hide in religion.
Yeah.
So you got your husband out, you got your mother out, but your son, you couldn't convince him.
He talked to me when his father died back in February. The somebody located our son because we didn't know where he was. When he called a few hours later, Joe had already died. But he was not young. He was 90. He had a wonderful life. That's because he had a wonderful wife.
Yes. But how come you couldn't wake your son up? He didn't believe you with the CSA problems?
I what my son said is that you shouldn't have gone public, mother. You shouldn't have gone public.
But he believes in the religion, right?
Oh, yeah. He said, like uh,
Despite the abuse cases.
I say about my son, uh, how he views me and his father, I guess. Well, yeah, I said,
Mhm.
I broke the 11th commandment. Thou
Mhm.
shalt not go public.
Okay.
And he's such a, we trained him from infancy. Don't ever give this up. This is the truth. I don't I don't blame him. I manipulated his mind. His father manipulated his mind. He loved the organization. He loved it. He was there for 16 years. The last 4 years, he was married there. Got two kids. They're adults now. And I saw the boy when he was 3. That's over 20 years ago. But, you have a right to choose your religion.
Mhm.
You have the right to believe whatever you want to believe. Just don't do harm. That's in our actual Supreme Court decisions. There
Yeah.
have been actual decisions. I have pasted them on my wall and my desk and everything. Uh, don't um, Legislators can pass laws to regulate how individuals act, but not how they believe.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court affirmed that position in 1978 in Reynolds versus the U.S.
Wow. Yeah. So
So
that's
I apply that to my son. He's got a right to believe whatever he wants to.
yeah.
I have a right to believe what I'm doing. Just because I feel that he doesn't care about child abuse. I haven't spoken to him so long. I know he was not happy when we went forward. He would have liked if it was just we'd have kept it in house. So my husband, the last conversation Joe had with him was actually here in our yard, and he said because their son Luke was 3 years old. That was the last time we saw him. 3 years old, and so Joe said, "Well, despite the fact that we are disfellowshipped." He said, "You know that you can associate with us as long as you don't talk about religion." And he said, "I think we should be able to see Luke once in a while." And my son said, "No." He said, "Because you're not spiritual."
Hmm.
Can
Okay.
you imagine his father? His father would have given his own life for it. He did everything he could because he thought it was the truth. And his son told him that. But see, they don't think. When I spoke in Paris, I spoke at the Vatican in 2009 on this. And I
Really?
spoke
Wow.
Yeah, and I spoke in Paris to the anti-cult organization the government has, and they corrected me when I said this. When I said brainwashed,
Mhm.
leave it to the French. Mind manipulation.
Oh, that's a good one. Mind manipulation. That's good. And I guess you've probably heard of another website called Stop Mandated Shunning.
Yes, I'm going to be discussing something that most people don't know. So you're not going to hear a repeat. Hey, listen, I know I talk too much, but I'm interesting.
That's right. That's right. And what's the name of your website?
Watchtower
Okay, I'll make sure and put that in the description. And then I know you have a book called Uncensored, right?
Yes.
Okay, I've
And
seen that on
I
Amazon.
want to do the one on the Russells, but I don't know if I'll live long enough because I am 85 years old. So,
Like great. Like
you know,
great.
but I got a lot of uh, my father in me.
Yeah.
I'd like to make it to 91, or over that, but helps me to be able to be useful. I live to be useful.
Good.
That's the reason I do this. I've done it. I I don't know. I just the way it is. It's just so much sadness, and if I can die being useful, I'm okay with it. Even though the witnesses said I would never die.
Well, you're definitely famous.
Infamous, the Watchtower famous. But I find interesting is that they've never attacked me.
Oh, well, good.
Never.
That's
Never.
good.
Mm-mm.
They can be pretty harsh.
But they see they too afraid of what I got, of
Oh,
what I should have.
yeah.
They don't know. And they're probably right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. We really appreciate that. And I'll make sure everybody sees in the description the name of your website and your book.
Yes. Yes, I've been very, very nice. Thank you so much for asking me. When you asked me, I didn't even think twice. I wanted to meet you, and uh,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you being willing to do this. And I know some of the same people you knew, like Daniel Sidlik.
oh, Daniel was wonderful, a wonderful man. He's actually t told Joe and I over different things that that he differs with the organization, but he got in trouble when he was in writing department as a young man. He plagiarized an article out of Reader's Digest on baseball, and
Uh,
so they threw him out of the writing department. He went to the factory, and so it took him years to keep going, um, up the ladder. But he was a nice man. He was full of fun. Just it was a
but he
personal
knew
fun.
it was a lie, though, right? When he got to the top, he knew it was a lie. The governing
I
the
think he did. We took him on a trip. We was friends, and we went out to Long Island together to visit people that were friends of mine who grew old, and I grew old, and at Bethel. But before I became when I became a witness in Long Island, I attended a certain congregation. Well, these people are affiliated with that congregation, and they lived, and the man was the woman's second wife, and he was over a museum. He was very, very lovely man. So we had and they lived at on a site, the Guggenheim a homestead site in Westbury, Long Island, and that had three Guggenheim homes on it. They were old, and this couple lived in one of the homes because he was a curator,
wow.
and so it was so gorgeous to see. And we were invited to lunch, and we took the Dan and his wife there. We talked about child abuse all the way out, all the way.
And he knew about this, I guess, of course.
Yeah. I had a meeting with him 2 days before we left Bethel. I made an appointment with him in his office, and I went and spent 30 minutes with him talking. He had a phone call from the lobby that some of his guests arrived, and I asked for 30 minutes, and we weren't quite there. I think I had another 10 minutes. I always stuck to protocol. I always did, because that's the way you survive. And so he said, I'll be right down to get them. And when he hung up the phone, I said, no, I said, you promised me 30 minutes, and I want my 30 minutes. And I smiled. And he just sat there for a minute or two or less. And he said, called me back down to the lobby. He said, I'll be down. But he said, I'll be down in 15 minutes. And I finished up talking about child abuse.
Okay.
He was a good man. And I got funny experiences with about him. And
But did he want to do anything about the abuse problems?
I have no idea what he did because I left Bethel just shortly thereafter. Now, it was interesting to me that they gave me a card wishing us success and leaving Bethel in our new life, whatever, on the outside. And they had put a $50 bill in there.
Oh,
And I thought that was so sweet
that
because we
must
were all on a
budget.
stipend. But I know the governing body gets the green handshake.
Yeah.
Everywhere they go and they give a talk. And in fact, it got so when my husband was on the Bethel speaking list, he was on that, and we went to different. But we never achieved that height of celebrityship. But it was getting so when we'd shake hands with people goodbye. from the assembly hall or wherever Joe was speaking. We're only getting $80 a month.
Yeah.
He's
But
getting
the
80, and I was getting
governing
80.
body members get a lot of money.
Woo, do they green handshakes?
Well,
But
thank you so much. I really appreciate all this information. It's really great. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much for staying tuned. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. And thank you, Barbara, for sharing your story today. If you'd like to see more stories like this, take a look at this one. And remember to always use your critical thinking skills when you're making decisions. And if you'd like to join our membership, we do have membership-only videos and early release videos. And also we have Patreon. So thank you so much for joining in today, and we will see you again on the next one. Stay tuned.